present to you some brief ideas. I want to thank GSDS Forum for public dialogue, particularly my friend, young friend Randhir Gautam, Professor Anand, Kumar, and other conveners for inviting me to come and share some of my ideas on this question. I am not going to summarize what Professor Nivedita Menon said. In sutras, in short, it was such a wonderful intellectual treat. I would say public intellectual treat in the tradition of Prataksham Kim Pramanam. You know, her speech itself speaks for her level of public intellectualism. What I am going to do is place before you a few questions and then very briefly try and explicate them in the form of some tentative answers and finally leave you with a question or so. I want to begin at the very beginning, like Nivedita ji did, that is, who is an intellectual? She defined the intellectual, but then moved, this very swiftly to maybe because of the constraints of time, to intellectualism and the relationship it has with university education, which is, I agree with her, which is a very important site for crossbreeding of ideas, debating things, and producing knowledge thereby. Who is an intellectual? If we go by a very simple definition, anyone who thinks is a thinker and therefore an intellectual. By that definition, all of us in a way are, definitely all of us are potential thinkers and intellectuals. Some realize that potential, some give up voluntarily, that is different. Fine-tuning that further, anyone who thinks rationally is an intellectual. Now, the moment I use the word rational or rational, we are entering a debatable territory where somebody's rationality may be another person's irrationality or poison or whatever you may say. Also, people who think deeply about something, any aspect of life, any aspect of society can also be termed as intellectuals. If that be the definition, I'm sure, and in practice also you would see there are more intellectuals who have contributed from outside the university site to public debate and discussion than from within. I mean, you could start thinking from Socrates downwards in the Western tradition, from Buddha downwards in our own tradition, or even earlier, and so on. Then the next stage is, who is a public intellectual? The moment we bring in the word public, as I would explicate in a couple of minutes, we bring in, societal norms into the game, because public is actually the society and there are certain societal norms and other things. But the moment you raise the question of a public intellectual, doesn't it by definition raise the question, are there private intellectuals too? If there are public intellectuals, there have to be private intellectuals. And if there are, who are they? Gramsci, of course, talked of organic intellectuals, but he could have never imagined what is happening now. And I am now trying to coin a term for within the same domain called synthetic intellectuals. And these synthetic intellectuals are non-humans. ChatGPT is perhaps going to be the biggest synthetic intellectual in the times to come. So you have to think of all these. And the moment you talk of a public or a private intellectual, you have immediately to think, what are their roles? Are the roles of public intellectuals confined to society and that of private intellectuals confined to individuals or institutions or political parties or to certain concepts of nation or nationhood? All this. And do the roles of these two are at loggerheads all the time with one another, that is of public and private intellectuals? If this be so, how do we decide whose role is more significant, is more relevant, is more needed? And therein comes what I think the question of ethics and its relationship with intellectuals. Now, ethics or morality or ideology or whatever name you want to give it is, to me, the test for an intellectual vis-a-vis his or her role in the society. And ethical norms, they may not be the same for every society. They may not have the same definition for everybody. But by and large, we do understand that let me try and put this way. For me, ethical norms would be something which involves the good of everyone, an ideal situation which never prevails, which may not prevail, but the good of everyone in a society, something that Gandhi said, wiping the tears from the last suffering person or something like that. That is the criteria for me for deciding whether a public intellectual or a private intellectual, has any role to play in the society, and if that, how good or how needed that role is. And for the brief limited purposes, because we are all talking in a certain context, in a certain socio-politico, economico, ideological context that prevails within this country, as Nivedita ji, tried to tell us, and also beyond our borders, what prevails. To me, perhaps what our own ancient wisdom gave us, Vasudev Kutumbakam, in a limited sense, I say, could be within that ethics, the criteria of treating the whole world as one large family, and within the family, everybody is good. And this Vasudev Kutumbakam should not just include humans, but as much of animal kingdom, as much of plant power, and so on. Climate change has, made us sensitive to that, whether we will learn about it or not. So these are some of the questions that I would like us to think about. And I'm not going to give you the list of the intellectuals and then try and categorize them in the category of public or private intellectuals. I have for myself one criterion which I have elaborated upon, but I certainly want to invoke certain names to say and show that they may lie more outside the university domain and so on. In our own context, in the last few years, was Dabolkar a public intellectual? Was Kalburgi a public intellectual? Was Pansare a public intellectual? Was Gauri Lankesh a public intellectual? Going beyond, was Ken Saro-Wiwa of Nigeria, whom Sani Abacha, the dictator, hanged publicly? Was he an intellectual? Is Gugi Wathiango an intellectual? Is Rushdie an intellectual? Was Pash, who was killed by the terrorists in Punjab during terrorism, was he an intellectual? Was Ravi an intellectual? Is Adarniya Ram Madhav ji, Jagdesan ji, Surjit Bhalla, or Arnab Goswami included in that list also? Are they also intellectuals? I think they all are. And then there is, of course, the list of these people who are intellectuals of a special kind. Nivedita Menon would be in one of those. Anand Kumar would be another. Yours truly would be another. And these are called the intellectuals of Tukde Tukde gang. I want to share with you something which happened this morning with me. I was in a bank in Gurgaon, where I live now, and the girl at the counter asked me, "Sir, what do you do for a living?" I said, "You can see I am an ancient man, I'm an old man. I was a teacher at JNU." Someone standing next to me waiting for his turn suddenly and said, "Maaf kariye bhai sahab, ye JNU itni badnaam kyun hai?" I did not want to enter into an argument with him. I could very well have. I am an argumentative Indian, but I thought he was far below me. But this is what is being done to intellectuals today. Intellectuals who to me are public intellectuals means they try and enter into debate. I'm not even thinking of big producers of knowledge intellectuals. I'm just thinking people who raise questions. I think, for instance, people who do PIL work, public litigations and asking questions are perhaps the most significant intellectuals of our times. I'm even just thinking of people who raise questions, and JNU has always raised questions. So in a certain socio-political atmosphere, they are immediately slotted as Tukde Tukde gang without realizing this fact that even the Supreme Court has said there is no such expression as that. And our young intellectual friend who is now become our leader, Kanhaiya Kumar, was the first one to be accused of this, and so on and so forth. So what I want to say is that in such times as these, and that is why I think that must be the reason why Randhir and others must have thought of a debate on this very topic. The duty of all intellectuals is private or public, is to stand by that concept of everybody is good, inclusiveness. We give a lot of lecture. We are in America, we are in UK, we are in EU, and we are talking of democracy and inclusiveness and taking everybody along. And when we are home, we know what is the situation. But what happens? In fact, by their own partisan attitudes, people slot themselves, whether they are private intellectuals or public intellectuals, whether they are talking of the good of a certain section of society, the privileged section, and giving them further privileges, or standing up for the people who may be privileged or non-privileged or less privileged or privilegeless, you know. And that is where I think it is very important to always keep in mind that if there are public intellectuals, there are also private intellectuals, and this fight will go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for a very brilliant and deep presentation, I would say. While making the distinction between public and private, I was recalling Edward Said embodied the notion of always being quite not right, evident by his principal critique of all forms of certainties and dogmas, and his refusal to be silent in the face of human suffering at home and abroad. So while recalling such names, we are sociology, we read the work of Tonvi, who talked about critical minority, Sirjanatmak Alpsankhya, and how critical minority transforms the world because they question things. So thank you so much for invoking such embedded idea of intellectual, which is very praxeological in that sense. Now I request Raghu Kumarji to have a discussion session.
Thank you.
I request you to
my video is stopped
5
by
to 10 minutes.
yeah, my video is stopped by administration, admin. So hope you have to start it. However,
Yes, yes.
thank you very much. First of all, I thank.
Please start because the
Yeah,
request has.
I
Yes.
thank the Gandhian School of Democracy and Socialism for inviting me to this discussion where great intellectuals, public and private, as Harish Narang has said, are participating here. I'm a practicing advocate, practicing in the areas of service law and labor law. The second thing is I basically believe in something called as a dialogue, a continued dialogue in the society. My activity, my major activities, apart from my practice as an advocate, is Center for Social Dialogue, where we try to create a dialogue not only among the intellectuals, but invite common men to give their expression for certain things. So while thanking all of you for your wonderful contribution, in our discussion today, there are two aspects. One is intellectual, the other is society. And what the society wants from the intellectual, basically. What society needs from the intellectual, and what is the widening gap between the intellectual and the society. See, just now we talked about something called as one common man in the bank asked the professor as why JNU has become a bad thing today. It's a very commonplace question, a very irritating question for any intellectual. But are we not supposed to answer that question? That is the big area which I would like to place before you, because when we say we believe that all common men, all men are philosophers, to invite Gramsci once again, all men are philosophers, all men are intellectuals. Then how do this the so-called intellectual who is separating from the society creates conversation with the common man? Because he has, see, I just cite one example in my life. One day I was delivering a lecture on Gandhi's philosophy to some graduate students. At the end of the session, a young girl asked me, "Sir, I am very much inspired by your speech. I would like to ask one question. Suppose something drastic thing happens in the society, in the public view. What shall I do? Shall I jump into action? Supposing a girl is being attacked by an anti-social element. Shall I jump into action to stop that incident? Or what shall I do? What's my duty as an enlightened citizen after listening to you?" I was perplexed because that girl has put a very small question, but the answer is very tough one. Because if I advise the girl that now, yes, you have to jump into action and save that girl, I will be doing injustice both to the girl and to the girl's family. So what shall be my advice? Then I started saying that, see, at the time of Gandhi, the state was held by a colonial rule. The institutions available with the state were the oppressive institutions. Today, after the formation of a democratic state in India, we have certain developed institutions like the judiciary, police, executive, women organizations. You have to take the help of all these people. The issue that I would like to place before you is there is a common man logic. Many of the intellectuals like Gramsci also recognize that there is something called as a common man's logic. And the common man's logic is mostly or many times is a problematic one for intellectual to explain back. So when we say that the role of the intellectual in the society is mostly formed out of the so-called common man outside the universities. Outside, see, for example, an auto driver, or a technician, or an agricultural labor, what he wants from the intellectual, what kind of support he wants. He comes to us with a small request for writing a representation, sometimes even for a leave letter. See, we regularly see all these things in our life because they don't expect any great advice from us on any intellectual issue. They want a small representation to be written to the district collector or a tahsildar or MRO, Mandal Revenue Officer. So here, can an intellectual say that I am very busy with enamored with greater ideas of the secularism and socialism, and I have no time for you to spare for your representation. So the problem in the society in this particular area is how do we see, even earlier also I had this experience in one of a serious meeting where the issue was relating to reservations to the Muslims, because government at that time in 2007, AP government has introduced a bill for reservation for Muslims in the education. Some meeting was being held, one public intellectual was addressing that people. He was talking about so many things, and he suddenly said one sentence, which used the word called as, some people talk about negatively about the equality, like all fingers in the hand are not similar. Then he said that this is a Bajar logic. I objected to him. I immediately raised and said that, please don't say that there is something called as a Bajar logic. Bajar is also a place where conversations take place. Everywhere in the society, conversations do take place. And why certain conversations take precedence over others at a particular point of history, or at a particular point of time in the history, is a matter to be of our concern. Where we are, where that gap is developing between the so-called, I don't say intellectual, the so-called claimant of intellectualism and the common man. And how do we fill that gap? I believe, on my side, I believe in conversations, wherever I am, whatever be the place. And I spend hours together. People even in my office complain against me that, why you spend that much of time with that particular person who has come with you with a very small request. But I believe, I think that the role of the intellectual will be more in the society, more effective in the society. And society will be looking towards the intellectual only when a conversation takes place between the educated man and the remaining society. Because this is an area which I would like to place before you for discussion, because yes, there shall be a dialogue at every stage, at every point, at every situation, so that common man's questions need to be answered. So with this small intervention, I thank you for giving this opportunity to me. Thank you all.
Thank you, Raghu Kumarji. Raghu Kumarji is a social activist also, and he has been in trade union movement. So for initiating a question answer session, I would request Dr. Payali Mukherjee. She is from Triple IT. So Dr. Mukherjee, over to you.
Thank you, Randhir, and a very good evening to all of you. I am actually fascinated hearing the discussions today. My question is pretty brief, but the idea of public intellectual is understood today as almost as the critical intellectuals are an endangered species, and there is a lot of political pressure. Today's intellectuals have a fear of the political, and it seems like the political also has a terrible indifference to what could be called as the intellectual. So in this kind of this idea of where the process is as a decline of the intellectual, it's almost described as a process of distancing from the public sphere towards an increasingly professionalized, corporate, managerial, narrowed worldview. My question would be to Professor Menon, that what is the role of the intellectual today when there is a lot of fear around this preserving this concept of the intellectual, and also this arrival of the synthetic intellectual, which has become so very dominant in today's time, in and beyond the classroom.
Thank you, Payal. I think you've kind of laid out a scenario with which I'm in agreement. I see your question more as a comment because I think what is the role of the intellectual is something that has actually become very evident. We need to, as I said, first expand the idea of the intellectual and look at what it is about this intellectual who could be a farmer who understands what the neoliberal policies are doing to agriculture. I would say that a farmer who understands that and expresses, and a farmer's movement that expresses those views is performing an intellectual role in society. And why is it that universities have been at the receiving end of the worst kind of aggression that we could never have imagined prior to 2014? So it's very evident that the role of the intellectual can be extrapolated from this fear of the intellectual that this regime in particular has shown. All states, all states are, whether regardless of party in power, all state formations are suspicious of thinking intellectuals. But I think this regime in particular has been. So the role would be, as you're saying, to confront that violence and to continue to speak to the extent possible, I would say. I mean, I don't see what else it can be. What else can one do?
Yeah, but
May I add a few words? May I add a few words, please?
Yes, definitely.
While I agree with you that there is this increased atmosphere of fear, which is primarily aimed at silencing people whom we may call intellectuals, or people who think, or people who ask questions. But remember, there is always this hope, and the proof of the pudding is in its eating. You are sitting in a forum where we are discussing this, you are asking questions, and there are people giving answers which are beyond that sense of fear. And there is a whole world in the country beyond such discussion forums, which are in plenty, where people in practical life are challenging things, challenging status quo, even at the fear of losing their lives, making themselves in the front line of attack. There are still so many people who are filing PILs on behalf of the underprivileged, unprivileged, and so on. There are people who are fearlessly speaking. I took the name of one young person from my university, Kumar, who is speaking on public fora without any fear. In fact, I would say also without any rancor, but raising all those basic questions. Pratap Bhanu Mehtaji, we had the privilege of having him at JNU also, writes week after week, fortnight after fortnight, those columns. My colleague Nivedita, whom I have heard so many times on so many public fora, beyond the university fora also, has spoken fearlessly about some of these things. The very fact that there is an institution called GSDS, which continues to discuss these things, gives us hope that all is not lost.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I'm really grateful that we are having this conversation. My question was also targeted towards this shrinking space for public intellectuals among the public. Like there is this, the shrinking is not happening because there is the sense of fear which is top down, but also a kind of, I would say, disregard for the public intellectual, which sometimes is bothersome. And that's also another question, that what is the role of the public intellectual in creating the critical consensus among people who are supposedly going to decide, understand, think about the condition of their country, their nation. So I was also very curious to know your comments and on this particular idea.
If I may come in here, Payal, I'm thinking actually of what Harish ji said about the person in the bank. I find that if that is the way the question was posed, I take it very seriously. JNU itna badnaam kyun hai? Why is JNU defamed so much? Which means that the person is not accepting the defamation. He did not say JNU इतनी खराब जगह क्यों है? आप लोग टुकड़े टुकड़े क्यों करना चाहते हैं हिंदुस्तान को? His question was बदनाम क्यों है? So I find it fascinating that, so I'm using that to address your question, that there is a way in which there is no role in the public domain for the intellectual or for critical thinking. I don't really agree. I think there is at every level, and Harish ji also gave many examples, but at every level there is a speaking out and a speaking up. Whether it's on sexual harassment, whether it's supporting the wrestlers, whether it is supporting the farmers movement or students. I mean, I think the public domain, and I actually find that up to this point anyway, students who are coming into MA are coming with an understanding of what's going on. So I think I would take that question, badnaam kyun hai, very seriously, which means that he really is puzzled by why there is such an attack on this institution. Why does it have to be made to appear to be so terrible? And there's really an openness to knowing why it's not terrible, I think. That's the way I would read it.
Probably it's also, there is some positive aspect to it as well, because the person is speculating about it. And not accepting.
I would like to add something to that. He is not speculating. He has made up his mind. I'll give you another personal example. Forgive me for that. But that was also in the public domain, and show you that it is not that we are not contending or we are not fighting such attitudes. I think the only time I appeared in a public debate with Arnab Goswami, when he was with the earlier channel, where he was running a channel, immediately after Kanhaiya Kumar's and his friends' discussion came up. And on the panel was a fellow who calls himself Major General this or that, puts on a topi and comes. And straight away, when I had finished speaking, he said, "Professor, you don't have a right to say all that because you are anti-national. At JNU, you are all anti-nationals." And I had to shut him up. I raised my finger. Arnab Goswami did not know, what was coming. So he just gave me the permission. And I said, "You, Mr. So-and-so, I don't care whether you are Major General or what. Go home and look at your degree. You are the aulad of anti-nationals. You have a degree from JNU, which you call anti-nationals." Because he was from NDA and we gave the degree. And I went on to tell him something more. I said, all your army chiefs for the last 6 chiefs or 8 chiefs, army chief, naval chief, air force chief, all have degrees from this anti-national university. And then I went on to ask him, before Arnab Goswami, shut me up by cutting off my mic. I said, "You believe in Nirmala Sitharamanji? She is an anti-national. You believe in Jaishankar? He is an anti-national." They are all products of JNU. So the point is not JNU. The point is not us. The point is that in public domain, we have been contending with this, but in this particular space where there was a small counter of a bank and there were other people, I didn't want to enter into that because I am a very aggressive kind of argumentative Indian, and it would have created some problem for the bank. But the point is, you are right, this space is shrinking. In fact, the shrinking space started much earlier. It started with the agenda of liberalization of our economy, opening up the economy, as Nivedita ji also said, bringing in what we call as the professional management courses, giving up, you know, through propaganda, giving up the relevance of humanities and social sciences. And the shrinking space started there in the universities. So, but as you know, there are no free lunches. The result, what is before us, had to happen. Because if you created pay packages, instead of salaries, if you brought in everything else, then you had to also buy the Western intellectual agenda, which is of clash of civilizations. I'm thinking
Thank
of
you.
Huntington's hypothesis.
Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
we have 3 persons who raised their hand. And regarding the hope, it's very important because Professor Henry Goodix also talks about that agency is the condition of a struggle and hope is the condition of agency. So, you know, it is something, you know, you talked about the idea of hope, which is very, very important. So I request Alok Tandonji to please unmute, yes, and ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this lively discussion on this very, very important and significant issue of our times. My question is, first I would like to thank Professor Nivedita Menon for making a distinction between the professionals and the public intellectuals. But if I remember well, there is a distinction made by Paul Baron or somebody else between intellect of workers and intellectuals. So if we keep these academics, professionals, management professionals, doctors, engineers, all those who earn their living by their using mainly their brains, can be put into the category of intellect workers. But when we talk about public intellectuals, then there is, as Edward Said had defined, as Sartre has defined, as Gramsci has defined, there is a value element in that, and that is of enhancing freedom and struggling for that. So there is an element of moral courage, which may not be with the professionals. And as Professor Harish ji said very well, that since the opening of the economy, the whole ideological domain into that type of management courses, and the yearning of the middle class students to go for that and earn a very good professional life and career. So that has spoiled all the ideological setup given by the JNU. My question to Professor Nivedita Menon is that when in this situation, the unique experiment of JNU is being dismantled and its repercussions are seen in other universities as well, where do you find a space, a new space for growing, for inculcating this type of critical attitude among the people for the development of this sort of public intellectuals? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alokji. Your question is very jayez, and so jayez that I don't have an answer for it. But I think we are facing a situation in which a particular phase in India's history may be coming to an end. I hope not, but a particular phase in which public universities were at the forefront of generating these kinds of spaces. As I said, there's both a promise and the negation of the promise, but in that space there is an efflorescence. If universities are no longer available to us, we will have to find new spaces in which young people can be addressed and we can engage in conversations. And I think we will have to find and make new spaces. There is no doubt. If the universities go the way they're going now, both in terms of faculty appointments and in terms of restricting student participation and student entrance. And the NEP's purpose is to privatize and to restrict thinking. We will have to find new spaces. I think you've asked a question for which I obviously don't have the answer right now, but this is the question that will have to guide us over the next several years, unless we're able to reverse, which I still hope, unless we're able to reverse the trend in the universities in some way. This is a question we will have to face head on very soon.
Something?
Mandakini
May I
Bhattacharya.
add?
Ji, Harish ji. Please, sir.
You're muted.
You are
Harish,
muted, sir.
One of the alternative ways is for intellectuals to write publicly, become writers, become translators. You know, there is so much of resistance to the present ideas of India in Bhasha literature today, in all the major Indian languages today, even among those who write in English from India. Not only that, many people are translating into Indian languages that kind of literature which counters the current thinking and current philosophy of managing the state. So one of the alternatives could be that through imaginary writings, imaginative writings, creative writings, or translations. I'm a teacher of literature, so I can think of that. We certainly can find one of the alternatives to counter this attack on freedom and social dialogue that you spoke about, Alokji.
Mandakini Bhattacharya ji.
What do you think about the social media's role? Some people have a very optimistic role of social media in it. Do you agree?
I'll just hold on to that question. Can we just take Mandakini Bhattacharya's question? I'll take both questions together.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, Harish Narang ji. Thank you so much for your illuminating comments. I'm from Kolkata, Associate Professor in English. I have just two comments. One is about Gramsci, about what we were discussing. How do we counter this sort of propaganda that is going on about various institutions? Well, as Gramsci said, there are traditional intellectuals like us, teachers, lawyers, scientists, doctors, and somehow there are the organic intellectuals which grow up with the demands of time and who are the leaders of their class, and they seek to destroy the hegemony and replace with their own hegemony. So somewhere traditional intellectuals also go into the vanguard, they undergo a transformation, and they become organic intellectuals too. And that is the only hope that we right now have of this disintegration of society that we are probably all of us dreading. But also I have great hope in this transformation of intellectuals from their traditional to organic function. And this is one great hope we can hold on to. My second comment, thank you very much, Harish Narangji, for this highlight of literature. Because literature is something where we do not need to be limited to our protest to the universities. Public intellectuals can exist outside the university domains. And we have seen this with African American literature, how it has become from the margins, it has come to the center, it has taken the place of national literature, and they did not care for university approvals or the approvals of academia or African American literature being included in syllabi. They simply went ahead in the Black Arts movement with various political organizations of the Black people, and hopefully some of it is also being reflected today in our Dalit literature and Dalit organizations. Thank you very much, both sir and ma'am. Thank you and good evening.
Yes, thank you, Mandakini. That was a very important comment. I don't think it was a question. I think your points are all very valid. So to go back to the question of social media in that case, I noticed actually a comment about Russia in the chat column, and I find that very interesting. I'll just read out the comment. There are many public speakers here in Russia who take their chance in YouTube being followed by hundreds of thousands of watchers, though it's quite risky. I want to place that and use that to address the question of social media, because there is there is a way in which social media is like any technology or like any new medium, in that there are obviously ways in which social media presence can overwhelm debate. But the fact is, as our colleague says, the social media offers people the space to speak and do. For example, Ravish Kumar, whose name I would certainly place among those if we were listing intellectuals. Ravish Kumar has, he resigned, ethically from NDTV, and he has started a YouTube channel. So although it's risky, as our colleague says, social media can actually offer alternative spaces to speak and to do things. And I would take it as a space in which we can. Can we take the next question? I will have to leave, but that doesn't mean the session has to end. But
Yes.
maybe we can take Kumar's question now.
Kumar. Kumar, please unmute.
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and all the panelists for the very thought-provoking ideas on intellectuals. I think everyone is right in their definition and explanation regarding how the intellectuals should behave or what they should be doing in society for the betterment of the humankind. My question particularly is, it's general, anybody can answer that, and I would be happy if Professor Menon would shed light on this. The situation, the global, if we compare India's situation with other countries, other developed countries in the world, it has changed significantly after the restoration of peace in India, and after the Indian Swaraj. So now we are on the verge of identity crisis because of the growing influence and the advancement in technology like artificial intelligence. In this situation, how can intellectuals, whether traditional or organic, be very much effective to pass on their agenda or to pass their ideas to the mass, to the public, especially when there is a growing tradition of controlling media by the state?
Well, the fact is that control over the media is a global phenomenon, and there is a way in which big business houses control media all over the world. And this is where I'm finding social media and independent online portals offering us space. So the new technology, which you can start a blog, right? And you start blogging and people read. You do videos and people watch. So there are multiple new ways of entering of placing our views in the public domain. And I think we should take advantage of all of that. We don't have to go with the conventional mainstream media at all, which is completely sold out, as we know. We can use other fora, and it's interesting that those other fora are here, and those fora are also taken over by the right wing, but they're not at all completely taken over by the right wing. The presence of anti-capitalist and anti-majoritarian voices is quite strong in these spaces. So I think there are new kinds of spaces that have opened up to us.
May I add something?
Sure, please.
Sure.
Kumar, you talked of artificial intelligence.
That's right.
Whose acme is this chat GPT. And I'm really scared about this chat GPT because you could feed data, doctored data in the name of an intellectual, in such a manner that the machine produces a certain kind of discourse in the name of that intellectual, which is actually a part of the doctored data fed in. And that really to me is very dangerous. Hypothetically, if speeches of Kanhaiya Kumar tomorrow doctored in a certain manner were fed in, it could produce a speech or a discourse by Kanhaiya Kumar, which could really damn him. This is what I called as the synthetic intellectual, which is really, really dangerous for me.
Yes,
Thank you.
I understand your point, but isn't there copyright law about this artificial intelligence to control?
No, there's no copyright law. It doesn't come under copyright law. I think what Harishji is saying, see, I think that, however, I'm not sure, Harishji, that you can just feed data into the internet in such a way that ChatGPT will reproduce it, because ChatGPT actually reproduces what is available as a whole. So what will happen, as Ted Chiang, who's a science fiction writer, said, is that what will happen gradually is that ChatGPT will keep reproducing what's on the net, but what ChatGPT is producing is also going onto the net, right? So that's what it will take back also. So he says that it will become like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy gradually. So I was quite intrigued by that idea, and I wouldn't. I mean, right now I'm not.
May I say, Nivedita ji, that photocopy is very important, because photocopy is something where we doctor things, we cut and frame, and therefore once we have a doctored copy or a photocopy, the further, I don't know, I could be wrong.
No, I feel that there's too much panic about the ChatGPT, which without recognizing the limitations of ChatGPT. But I may be wrong. Maybe these are famous last words. I don't know. But I'm inclined not to be so panic-stricken about ChatGPT.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We had a very long discussion. We are running out of the time because our respected speaker has to go some other.
I have also to leave.
Thank you. So for the last word, I would like to quote Michel Foucault, who once said that the work of an intellectual is not to shape others' political will. It is through the analysis that he carries out in his own field to question over and over again what is postulated as self-evident, to disturb people's mental health, the way they do and things to dissipate what is familiar and acceptable, and to re-examine rules and institutions, and on the basis of this problematization, to participate in the formation of a political will. So that is something which Michel Foucault wrote in 1988. So with this concluding remark and with this deep engagement, we had a good session. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining and attending today's GSDS Forum Weekly Dialogue. I'm very grateful to Professor Nivedita Menon ji, Professor Harish Narang ji, Dr. A.RAGHU Kumar ji, Professor Jagdeep Chokar, who was a kind of inspiring soul for all of us who work for political reform. Also participated in today's session, Professor Gyan Glui from Italy, University of Pisa, Alok Tandon ji, Professor Anjali Namai ji, Dr. Gargi Chakravarti also attended today's session. I'm very sorry that we did not hear some of our respected participants. So we'll invite you for our coming GSDS Weekly Forum Dialogue. Thank you so much. And we look forward for your kind participation and engagement with GSDS Forum in coming sessions as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Raghuji. Thank you.